So Bobby Brown's "Don't Be Cruel" it turned 36 years old this year, which is crazy. If you said Bobby Brown's "Don't Be Cruel" is 26 years old, it's like, okay. No, this album's almost 40 years old, but it's still timeless. Now, this is from the Roni live video. If you watch the Roni live video, please do. That was peak Bobby Brown. And if you wanna know what your mama or your grandmama were doing when they were in high school or college in 1989, they was probably at that tour. Hell, that might be your mama there. I wonder where that young lady is at today. So the reason I'm bringing this up is that, one, I love that album, but two, I was thinking, listen, Thriller by Michael Jackson is beyond iconic. Same as Prince's Purple Rain. Iconic. But I think Don't Be Cruel should be in that same category. Now I said, how so? If you look at what Bobby did on that album, and if you look at the performances that he did, you will see a direct connection between Bobby Brown and Don't Be Cruel to a lot of the early R&B dudes in the early to mid 1990s. Jodeci, R. Kelly, Joe, Montel, Jordan, H-Town. A lot of those dudes had that same type of mentality, that same type of bravado, that same type of musicality, that same type of performance. Like Bobby brought this young lady on stage in 1988, and he got arrested. Like, I think he got arrested in another city because he did that. Janet Jackson started bringing up dudes on stage in the early 90s. People were not bringing up people on stages like that. I'm not saying Bobby started that, but for a young person, like 19, 20 years old when Bobby was doing it, people weren't doing that. But let's go back. I got ahead of myself. So Bobby was part of New Edition, but Bobby always had a little Eddie Kane Jr. from the Five Heartbeats. He had a little David Ruffin from the Temptations inside of him. And he would be a solo performer within the group, even though he loved the guys. But the guys were getting frustrated, and management was getting frustrated. And they made New Edition decide, do they want to vote Bob in or vote Bob out? And they voted Bob out. Now, years later, they would say they regretted it because they loved Bob. But the way the universe works, if they didn't kick out Bobby, we wouldn't have Don't Be Cruel. If they didn't kick out Bobby, Johnny Gill wouldn't be part of the group where he would sing Boys to Men, which Boys to Men would take their name, and then we have Boys to Men. So the universe says is right that they kicked out Bob, but at the time it was pretty heartbreaking because Bobby didn't want to go, and they really didn't want to see Bob go. So Bob goes, he makes the first album. He makes the song Girlfriend, which I love. I love Girlfriend, but it wasn't edgy enough. Bobby was a fan of Michael Jackson, but he was also a fan of Rick James and also a fan of Prince. He wanted something a little bit edgier, and Girlfriend wasn't edgy enough for him. It was a very new edition-y type song. He also released Girl Next Door, which was produced by Larry Blackman from Cameo. Great, a little bit edgier, great tune, but Bobby looked like a young Larry Blackman in the video. The only difference is he didn't have a mustache, but he had the cod piece. I think his hair was slanted too. I think maybe. No, he had a high top like Larry. So that debut album didn't do well. So during that same time period, New Edition goes off and they make Any Heartbreak with Jane Jam and Terry Lewis. Bobby goes off to work with LA and Babyface on Don't Be Cruel. Now, this isn't the LaFace that we know now. This is LA and Babyface coming off the deal. They were producing tracks for people, and they had some hits, but they didn't produce a monster album yet. So they were still trying to prove themselves as a producer. And they also included Teddy Riley, who did one track off that album. And Teddy, at that point, was probably more experienced than LaFace because Teddy had done Keith Sweat's Make It Last Forever and the Guy debut album. Don't Be Cruel comes out. The song comes out. You hear this. You're like, what's that? Don't Be Cruel didn't sound like anything that was on the radio. That, oh my God. There was nothing that sounded like Don't Be Cruel on the radio. Nothing. It's like, who's that? Bobby Brown. Bobby Brown. That song was a monster, and it crossed over. Bobby wasn't a crossover artist. New Edition, they did well like with Mr. Telephone Man, but for the most part, New Edition wasn't a crossover group. They stayed firmly on R&B. Bobby crossed over on pop. Don't Be Cruel was huge. Well, you can't make a song better than that. My Prerogative comes out. The lone Teddy Riley track comes out. The signature Bobby Brown track. Now, Alien Babyface, they will do Roni, Rock With You, Every Little Step. All great songs. All great songs. All iconic songs. But however, My Prerogative, that's Bobby Brown in full Michael Jackson, in full Prince, in full Rick James. It's the track that he always wanted. Produced by Teddy Riley with assistance from Aaron Hall. Fantastic. And if you watch that video, it really inspires what we would see later. When we see Bobby's on stage with two dudes, he got the microphone headset dancing around. He has the two beautiful women in the background dancing, playing instruments, I think. We will see that later in 90s R&B. We would see that with Jodeci and R. Kelly and Montel Jordan and Joe and H-Town and all these early R&B acts. And even down the road, we would see, Don't Be Cruel. Okay, when people talk about Chris Brown and Usher, they usually mention Michael Jackson, and they love Michael Jackson. And you see the Michael Jackson influence. But I'm telling you, Chris Brown is a descendant of Don't Be Cruel. Usher is a descendant of Don't Be Cruel. Their performance style, the aggressiveness they have on stage is a descendant of Mr. Bobby Brown. So we have My Prerogative. Now him and Teddy would work together again on the Bobby album. Bobby would fall out with Babyface, unfortunately. But Teddy would do the Bobby album, which was great because it had like Humping Around and Getaway and Nothing in Common. We had something in common with Whitney Houston. And it was a really good album, but it was too many years late. The Bobby style by 1992, I think, 92, 93, when that album came out, BBD had did it. Like his guys from New Edition kind of, they did it with BBD. They did it with Jodeci. So even though the album was good, that influence, that groundbreaking influence he had in 1988, 89 was already taken over by different acts. Let's go back to 1989. Let's go back to this video. So you watched this video. Bobby got arrested because he brought a woman on stage and he was kind of grinding on her. And if you watch the video, it really wasn't that bad. But for 1988, it's like, boy, you can't do that. Arrest him. But if you watch that young Bobby Brown, man, 19, 20-year-old Bobby Brown, he was like a panther on stage. He was wiry. He had so much energy. He slinked on the stage. He was seductive on stage. His band was great. His backup singers were great. And he wasn't lip syncing. If you watch that Roni video, all vocals, there was no lip syncing. And again, Bobby isn't Michael Jackson. Bobby isn't Prince. But the thing about those New Edition guys with Ricky Bell and Ralph Tresvant and Bobby, they know their range. They know, like, I can't sing higher than this. I can't sing lower than this. This is my range. And Bobby sang within his range. And I think a lot of artists should learn how to do that. Stop trying to sound like Whitney Mariah. You're not going to do it. You're not that good at it. Know your range and stick in it. Stick in that pocket. Bobby stuck in his pocket. If you're a young guy and you want to, if you say, man, I'm a young guy, I don't know how to perform on stage, don't look at Michael Jackson. Look at Michael Jackson, but you're not Michael Jackson. You can look at Chris Brown, but Chris Brown is flying through the air. Just watch Bobby Brown's stage performance and you'll learn a lot from him. It's simple, but he knows how to command the stage. He knows how to look in people's eyes. He knows how to reach out his hand. It's the same stuff they learned, New Edition learned from, like, how the Temptations used to do, or the OJs used to do, where they, those doo-wop singers, where they sang to the women in the crowd. There's a lot of old school things mixed in there with new school stuff that Bobby created. Bobby had no peer in 1988. Name me another guy in 1988 that was doing what he was doing. He had guys his same age, like Al B. Sure, but they weren't doing what he was doing. Nobody. Like I said, the 90s was a bunch of dudes doing that. There was, even with New Edition, the guys that he was on tour with, the guys he made music with, when they were on any Heartbreak tour, they were still New Edition. They still did their stuff, but they didn't do what Bob did. Bob was special. And he got this because he loved Prince. He loved Michael Jackson, and he had this love and he loved Prince, Michael Jackson, and Rick James, and he put it all together. He was special, man. And the only reason I think we don't see this is because Bob is older now, and Bob is chubbier. Bob is slowed down. Bob's had health issues. Bob had addiction issues. Bob had all that stuff with Whitney, and then Whitney had all that stuff with him. So he's not the same guy anymore. So it's hard for a young person to look at Bobby Brown saying, what are you talking about? Chris Brown's the greatest. Yeah, Chris Brown is cool for 2024. But if you want to see the blueprint, watch the 1989 Bobby Brown. So shout out to Bobby Brown. Shout out to Don't Be Cruel. Tell me your favorite song from Don't Be Cruel. And Babyface is also, like, he's remaking his classic hits. Which Babyface classic hit of Bobby Brown's would you like to see him redo? Shout out to Bobby Brown, the king, as Whitney Houston once said once upon a time, of R&B.